Jack Thompson was not your average farmer. Sure, he owned a modest plot of land in the middle of nowhere, complete with a barn, a few chickens, and a vegetable patch that looked like it had been designed by a toddler with a hoe. But Jack wasn't just a farmer, he was a visionary. Or at least, that's what he told himself every time he accidentally set his compost pile on fire. Jack's farm was his pride and joy, a place where he could escape the chaos of modern life and embrace the simple pleasures. Chasing chickens, arguing with his goat, and occasionally filming himself doing ridiculous things for his YouTube channel, Jack's Farm Follies. His videos ranged from how to milk a goat without crying to why my chickens are better at chess than you. They weren't exactly viral, but they had a loyal following of about 37 people, most of whom were his mom and her bridge club. One day, Jack received a letter that would change his life. His eccentric uncle, who he hadn't seen since he was 6, and who once tried to sell him a magic potato, had passed away and left him a small inheritance. Jack, being the adventurous soul he was, decided to use the money to take a long overdue vacation. After all, farming was exhausting, and he deserved a break from Mr. Cluckles, the rooster who had a personal vendetta against his ankles. Before leaving, Jack entrusted his farm to his neighbor, Lucy, a sweet old lady who baked the best apple pie in the county and had a soft spot for Jack's antics. "Just make sure no one builds a shopping mall on my land while I'm gone," Jack joked as he handed her the keys. Lucy laughed, but little did Jack know, his joke was about to become a prophecy. Jack's vacation was everything he dreamed of and more. He hiked through mountains, swam in crystal-clear lakes, and even tried yoga, which ended with him stuck in a pose called downward-facing disaster. He posted updates on social media, blissfully unaware that back home, his farm was undergoing a transformation that would make his jaw drop, and not in a good way. One sunny afternoon, as Jack sipped a coconut on a beach in Bali, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Lucy. "Jack, you might want to come home. Something's happening." Jack, being the laid-back guy he was, replied, "Is Mr. Cluckles staging a coup again? Tell him I'll deal with him when I get back." Lucy's response was less reassuring. "It's not the chickens. It's worse." When Jack finally returned to his farm, he expected to find everything just as he left it. The slightly lopsided barn, the overgrown vegetable patch, and maybe a few new holes dug by his goat, Sirloin. What he did not expect was to find a 5-star hotel smack dab in the middle of his property. Yes, a hotel, complete with a swimming pool, a spa, and a neon sign that read, "Welcome to HOA Paradise Resort." Jack stood there, suitcase in hand, staring at the monstrosity that had replaced his beloved pumpkin patch. His brain short-circuited. "What in the name of Mr. Cluckles is this?" he shouted, startling a group of tourists who were lounging by the pool. It didn't take long for Jack to figure out what had happened. The HOA, Homeowners Association, a group of self-important busybodies who had always hated Jack's unconventional farming methods, had seized the opportunity to expand their empire. While Jack was off gallivanting in Bali, they had somehow convinced the local council that his farm was abandoned and in need of development. Lucy filled him in on the details. "They said it was for the greater good of the community," she explained, air quoting so hard Jack thought her fingers might fly off. "But we all know it's because Martha Hargrove, the HOA president, has been trying to get her hands on your land for years." Martha Hargrove. The name alone was enough to make Jack's blood boil. She was the kind of woman who wore pearls to a barbecue and had a smile so fake it could scare a used car salesman. Jack had crossed paths with her before, usually when she was complaining about his noisy chickens or his unsightly compost pile. As Jack stood there, staring at the hotel that had invaded his farm, something inside him snapped. But instead of rage, he felt amusement. A slow, mischievous grin spread across his face. "Oh, Martha," he muttered to himself, "you've just walked into my legal trap." You see, Jack wasn't just a farmer with a YouTube channel. He was also a bit of a legal nerd. During his downtime, usually while waiting for his chickens to lay eggs, he had spent hours reading up on property laws, zoning regulations, and obscure loopholes. He had always suspected the HOA would try something like this, so he had prepared for it. Before leaving for his vacation, Jack had quietly registered his farm as a protected wildlife sanctuary. He had even gone so far as to adopt a family of endangered squirrels, whom he named the Nutkins, to strengthen his case. The HOA, in their haste to build their precious hotel, had overlooked this little detail. Jack pulled out his phone and dialed his lawyer, Mr. Smith, a man so sharp he could probably sue the sun for giving him a sunburn. "Smith," Jack said, his voice dripping with glee. "It's time to activate Operation Cluckles." As Jack walked away from the hotel, whistling a jaunty tune, he couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. The HOA had underestimated him, and now they were about to learn a very important lesson. Never mess with a farmer who knows his way around a legal textbook and has a rooster with a grudge. Little did they know, Jack's revenge was just beginning, and it was going to be epic. While the HOA was busy sipping champagne in their newly built hotel, Jack was quietly assembling his legal avengers. His first move, calling his lawyer, Mr. Smith, a man who could probably argue his way out of a straitjacket. Smith was the kind of lawyer who wore suspenders ironically and had a library of law books so extensive it could double as a fire hazard. When Jack explained the situation, Smith didn't even blink. "A hotel on your wildlife sanctuary? Oh, this is going to be fun," he said, rubbing his hands together like a villain in a Bond movie. Jack and Mr. Smith spent the next few days buried under a mountain of paperwork. They dug up every obscure law, regulation, and loophole they could find. Jack even discovered a 19th century statute that prohibited the erection of any structure likely to disturb the natural habitat of the eastern blue-bellied squirrel. The Nutkins, Jack's adopted squirrel family, were technically western blue-bellied squirrels, but he figured no one would notice. Meanwhile, Jack's YouTube channel, Jack's Farm Follies, was about to get a major upgrade. He started posting daily updates about the HOA's hotel debacle, framing it as a David versus Goliath story, except David had a law degree and a rooster with a grudge. His videos went viral faster than a cat meme. One video, titled "How to Build a Hotel Without Permission," featured Jack giving a tour of the hotel while wearing a hard hat and holding a clipboard. "And over here," he said, pointing to the pool, "we have the illegal water feature. Notice how it's perfectly positioned to flood my vegetable patch. Truly a masterpiece of poor planning." The comments section exploded. People loved Jack's mix of humor and righteous indignation. Even Martha Hargrove's own nephew left a comment. "Aunt Martha's gonna lose it when she sees this. Can I have your autograph?" Martha, of course, was not amused. She called an emergency HOA meeting, which Jack crashed by showing up uninvited with a tray of Lucy's apple pies. "Thought you might need some snacks for your illegal meeting," he said, grinning as he handed out slices. Martha, her pearls practically vibrating with rage, tried to intimidate Jack. "You're out of your league, Thompson," she sneered. "We have lawyers, money, and the full support of the council." Jack just smiled. "Oh, Martha," he said, pulling out a stack of documents thicker than a dictionary. "I have something you don't. The law." He then proceeded to explain, in excruciating detail, how the HOA had violated at least 17 different regulations by building the hotel. He even brought in an expert witness, Dr. Emily Carter, a wildlife biologist who testified that the Nutkins were deeply traumatized by the construction. Martha tried to argue, but every time she opened her mouth, Mr. Cluckles, who Jack had brought along for moral support, let out a deafening crow. It was like having a feathery air horn in the room. By this point, the story had caught the attention of the local news. Reporters descended on Jack's farm like vultures on a carcass, eager to cover the bizarre battle between a farmer and the HOA. Jack, ever the showman, gave them plenty of material. He held a press conference in front of the hotel, flanked by Mr. Cluckles and the Nutkins. "This isn't just about my farm," he declared. "This is about standing up to bullies who think they can trample on the little guy. And also about protecting these adorable squirrels." The Nutkins, sensing their moment in the spotlight, staged a dramatic performance. One of them climbed onto his shoulder and pretended to faint, while another, Lady Nutella, held a tiny sign that read, "Save our home." The cameras ate it up, Martha, meanwhile, tried to fight back with her own press conference, but it didn't go well. She accidentally referred to the Nutkins as those raccoon things and got into a heated argument with a reporter who asked if she had a personal vendetta against Jack. "Of course not," she snapped. "I just think his farm is an eyesore." The reporter raised an eyebrow. "So this is about aesthetics?" Martha stammered, but before she could respond, Mr. Cluckles, who had somehow infiltrated the event, let out a crow so loud it made her jump. The video of her reaction went viral within minutes. As the legal battle heated up, Jack dropped his biggest bombshell yet. During a court hearing, Mr. Smith presented evidence that the HOA had falsified documents to get the hotel approved. Not only did they violate environmental laws, Smith said, but they also committed fraud, and that, Your Honor, is what we in the legal profession call a big no-no. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with a soft spot for underdogs, was not impressed with the HOA's antics. She issued an injunction halting all operations at the hotel and ordered the HOA to pay Jack a hefty fine. Jack, ever the gracious winner, offered to settle out of court on one condition: the hotel had to be dismantled and the land restored to its original state. "Oh, and I want Martha to personally apologize to Mr. Cluckles," he added. Martha, her pride in tatters, had no choice but to agree. The look on her face as she muttered, "I'm sorry, Rooster," was worth every second of Jack's effort. As the HOA began the humiliating process of tearing down their precious hotel, Jack celebrated with a barbecue on his farm. The Nutkins got their own table, and Mr. Cluckles strutted around like he owned the place, which, in a way, he did. But Jack's victory was far from complete. He still had one final move to make, and it was going to be the most shocking of all. The day of the trial arrived, and the courtroom was packed. Reporters, curious locals, and even a few of Jack's YouTube fans had shown up to witness the spectacle. Jack walked in wearing a suit that was slightly too big and a tie with tiny chicken prints. Martha, on the other hand, looked like she was auditioning for Real Housewives of the Suburbs, complete with a designer handbag and a glare that could curdle milk. The trial began with Jack's legal team presenting their case. Mr. Smith, in his element, delivered an opening statement so compelling it could have made a rock cry. "Your Honor," he began, "this is not just a case about property rights. This is about a man, his land, and the squirrels who call it home. The star witnesses, the Nutkins, of course. Dr. Emily Carter, the wildlife biologist, testified about the irreparable harm the hotel had caused to the squirrel population. She even presented a video of Sir Nuttington looking mournfully at a half-eaten acorn, which Jack had filmed earlier that morning. When it was Martha's turn to cross-examine Dr. Carter, things went downhill fast. "Do you really expect us to believe," Martha sneered, "that a few squirrels are more important than a hotel that could bring jobs and revenue to this community?" Dr. Carter didn't miss a beat. "With all due respect, ma'am, the squirrels were here first, and unlike your hotel, they don't violate zoning laws." The courtroom erupted in laughter. Even the judge cracked a smile. But the real showstopper was yet to come. Jack had decided to call Mr. Cluckles to the stand. "Yes, the rooster. Your Honor," Jack said, standing up with all the gravitas of a Shakespearean actor. "I'd like to call my final witness, Mr. Cluckles, the guardian of my farm and a victim of the HOA's reckless actions." The judge, who had clearly seen it all, sighed and said, "Mr. Thompson, I'll allow it. But if that bird causes any disruptions, I'm holding you in contempt." Jack nodded solemnly and carried Mr. Cluckles to the witness stand. The rooster, sensing the importance of the moment, puffed out his chest and let out a dignified cock-a-doodle-doo. Jack began his questioning. "Mr. Cluckles, can you tell the court how the construction of the hotel affected your daily life?" Mr. Cluckles tilted his head, as if deep in thought, then let out a series of agitated clucks. Jack nodded along, pretending to understand every word. "I see," Jack said, turning to the jury. "Mr. Cluckles says the noise from the construction caused him severe stress, to the point where he could no longer perform his duties as head rooster. He also claims that the hotel's pool water seeped into his favorite dust bath, ruining it." Martha, who looked like she was about to spontaneously combust, jumped to her feet. "Objection! This is absurd. That bird can't testify." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Overruled. I'd like to hear what Mr. Cluckles has to say." As the trial continued, Jack's legal team dropped bombshell after bombshell. They revealed that Martha had personally profited from the hotel deal, funneling money into her own accounts. They also uncovered evidence that the HOA had ignored multiple warnings about the environmental impact of the construction. Martha, realizing the walls were closing in, tried to play the victim. "This is a witch hunt," she cried. "Jack Thompson is just a disgruntled farmer with a vendetta." Jack, ever the showman, stood up and addressed the court. "Your Honor, if I may," he said, holding up a piece of paper. "This is a letter Martha wrote to the council, describing my farm as a blight on the community. She also called my chickens noisy nuisances." He paused for dramatic effect. "But here's the thing, my chickens are not nuisances. They're hard-working, tax-paying citizens." "Well, not the tax part, but you get the idea." The courtroom burst into laughter again. Even the bailiff had to stifle a chuckle. After hours of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. The judge read it aloud. "We find the HOA guilty of violating environmental laws, committing fraud, and generally being terrible neighbors. The hotel is to be dismantled immediately, and the HOA is ordered to pay Mr. Thompson $500,000 in damages." The courtroom erupted in cheers. Jack, grinning from ear to ear, turned to Martha and said, "Looks like the chickens have come home to roost." Martha, her face red with rage, stormed out of the courtroom, muttering something about appealing the decision. But Jack knew the truth. She was finished. As Jack left the courthouse, he was greeted by a crowd of supporters. The Nutkins, perched on his shoulders, waved tiny flags, and Mr. Cluckles strutted around like a conquering hero. Jack Thompson thought he'd won. The HOA was dismantling their ill-gotten hotel. Martha Hargrove had been publicly humiliated, and the Nutkins were thriving in their newly restored habitat. Life on the farm was peaceful again, or so he thought. But Martha, it turned out, was not one to go down without a fight. She had one last card to play, and it was a doozy. One sunny morning, as Jack was feeding Mr. Cluckles and planning his next YouTube video, How to Train Your Rooster to Do Your Taxes, he received a letter from the county council. It was a notice of eviction. "Eviction?" Jack shouted, nearly dropping his coffee. "What in the name of Sir Nuttington is this?" The letter claimed that Jack's farm was in violation of a little-known zoning law that prohibited non-commercial agricultural activities in residential areas. The kicker? The law had been quietly pushed through by none other than Martha Hargrove, who had somehow convinced the council that Jack's farm was a public nuisance. Jack's jaw dropped. That woman is like a bad rash. She just won't go away. Jack held an impromptu press conference. "This victory isn't just for me," he said. "It's for every little guy who's ever been pushed around by bullies like the HOA. And it's for these squirrels, who deserve to live in peace." The crowd cheered. Someone shouted, "Run for mayor, Jack." He laughed. "Maybe someday, but for now, I've got a farm to rebuild." Jack knew he had to act fast. He called Mr. Smith, who was already drafting a countermotion before Jack even finished explaining the situation. "This is dirty even for Martha," Smith said. "But don't worry, we've got the law on our side, and a rooster who's not afraid to testify." Meanwhile, Jack took to YouTube to rally his fans. In a video titled, "They're Trying to Take My Farm Again," he laid out the situation with his trademark humor. "Folks, it's me versus the HOA round 2, and this time it's personal. If you've ever rooted for the underdog or under-rooster, now's the time to show your support." The video went viral overnight. Fans flooded the comments with messages of support, and donations poured in to help Jack cover his legal fees. Even celebrities got in on the action. One particularly memorable tweet came from a famous comedian. "If Jack loses his farm, I'm adopting Mr. Cluckles and making him my co-host. Hashtag Team Cluckles." The final courtroom battle was even more dramatic than the first. Martha, now desperate, had hired a high-powered lawyer who looked like he'd stepped out of a legal drama on TV. But Jack wasn't intimidated. He walked into the courtroom with Mr. Cluckles under one arm and a folder full of evidence under the other. The trial was a roller coaster. Martha's lawyer argued that Jack's farm was a blight on the community and a threat to public safety. Apparently, Mr. Cluckles' early morning crowing was disturbing the peace. Jack's defense was simple but devastating. He presented evidence that the zoning law Martha had pushed through was specifically designed to target him. He also called in a parade of witnesses, including Lucy, who testified that Jack's farm was a beloved part of the community. But the real star of the show was, once again, Mr. Cluckles. When Jack asked the rooster to demonstrate his disturbing crow, Mr. Cluckles let out a perfectly timed cock-a-doodle-doo that had the entire courtroom in stitches. Even the judge couldn't keep a straight face. Just when it seemed like Jack had the upper hand, Martha dropped a bombshell. She claimed that Jack's farm was actually built on land that rightfully belonged to the HOA. She even produced a deed that seemed to back up her claim. The courtroom gasped. Jack's heart sank. Had Martha outsmarted him after all? But then Mr. Smith stood up. "Your Honor," he said, holding up a document. "I'd like to submit this as evidence. It's a copy of the original land grant from 1872, which clearly shows that the Thompson family has owned this land for generations." Martha's face turned pale. "That's impossible," she shouted. "Oh, it's very possible," Mr. Smith said, smirking. "And here's the kicker. Your so-called deed is a forgery." The courtroom erupted in chaos. Martha tried to protest, but the judge had seen enough. "Case dismissed," she declared. "And Mrs. Hargrove, I suggest you find a new hobby, one that doesn't involve harassing your neighbors." As Jack left the courtroom, he was greeted by a crowd of cheering supporters. The Nutkins, perched on his shoulders, waved tiny flags, and Mr. Cluckles strutted around like the hero he was. Martha, meanwhile, slunk away in disgrace. Rumor has it she moved to a remote island where there are no HOAs and definitely no roosters. Jack returned to his farm, where he threw a massive celebration. There was music, dancing, and enough apple pie to feed an army. Mr. Cluckles even got his own throne, complete with a crown made of hay. As the sun set on the farm, Jack sat down to film one final video. "Folks," he said, looking directly into the camera, "this victory belongs to all of us, to everyone who stood by me, shared my story, and believed in the power of a little guy with a big dream. Thank you. And to Martha, if you're watching this, I hope you've learned that you can't mess with a farmer who's got the law and a rooster on his side." He paused, then grinned. If you enjoyed this wild ride, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Jack's Farm Follies, because you never know what's going to happen next on this crazy farm. Until then, stay clucky. The video ended with Mr. Cluckles letting out one final, triumphant cock-a-doodle-doo. Jack's farm became a symbol of resilience and community spirit. He turned part of the land into a free public park, complete with a statue of Mr. Cluckles. The Nutkins, now local celebrities, even got their own line of merchandise. As for Jack, he continued to make YouTube videos, sharing his adventures and inspiring others to stand up for what's right. And whenever someone tried to push him around, he'd just smile and say, "You're messing with the wrong farmer." Because in the end, revenge isn't just about winning. It's about doing it with style, humor, and a rooster by your side. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Jack's Farm Follies for more hilarious adventures. And remember, always stand up to bullies, especially if you've got a rooster on your team.